Let's talk about the quality manual. This is the most basic and core document of your QMS. If you're just setting up your QMS, this is what you should start with. And in one aspect, also what you will end your work with. Before we dive into our template, let's look very briefly into why we're doing this. As I just said, this is a very basic document, so you will find the related requirements also in the very beginning of the ISO norm. Amongst other things, you will need to document what laws and standards apply, what role your entire organization will be taking, so for example, manufacturer or just distributor, and what processes you will need in order to carry out this role, and so on and so forth. All of this stuff should be mentioned, either described or at least referenced in your quality manual. Going forward, we see that in paragraph 4.2.1 and in section 4.2.2, a quality manual is explicitly required for that purpose. And in the case of our template, we also crammed in the quality policy of section 5.3 and the quality objectives of section 5.4.1 into our template for the quality manual. So when you get tired working with our template, asking yourself, do I really need to do all of this? Yes, sorry to say, we didn't come up with it. This is explicitly part of the norm, and our template really only is intended for minimal compliance. Now let's dive into our template and see how we covered this. Just like in the norm, you first describe your role. We assume that you're a manufacturer of medical devices. We then define the scope of applicable laws and standards. Disclaimer here, this is only a selection of you, and you will need to customize this a bit. So obviously, for example, in order to bring a new product to market now, you will need to remove the MDD from this list. Our template is a little bit outdated here. The remaining norms cited here are the core standards that apply for software medical devices. There's a whole number of other applicable norms though, such as the ISO 15223 for medical device labeling, or the ISO 27000 series, in case you need to comply with those. That list may grow long over time, so what I've seen often is that companies only really put down a core selection here, and then reference to a more elaborate list in a separate document. Moving on, you also need to specify what parts of those norms you can exclude as not applicable for your QMS. This is what we're doing here. And again, this is a selection specifically aimed at software medical devices, so you may not even need to adapt it much at all. Next comes a first section where you will need to get a bit creative. Define a quality policy for your company. If you have any person with a business MBA in your company, I recommend to hand your draft file over to them. Alternatively, this is a classical CEO task. Talk about the mission and vision of your company. Talk about the industry field that you're in and how your company wants to advance it. Break it down to 1 or 2 short paragraphs minimum, or up to half a page if you're really into it. Obviously, make sure it has some relation to quality work. So no stuff like high profit margins, getting rich fast, and so on. In this example here, let's just say very briefly, our company is active in the dental industry by using artificial intelligence, blockchain, and cloud computing. We want to improve patient benefits. Obviously, I'm joking here a bit, just so you get a rough idea of how this could look like. Amongst other things, your ISO 13485 requirements here, if we look at this again, are that the quality policy should apply to the purpose of the organization. So, for example, the industry field that you're in, and it should include a commitment to comply with regulatory requirements and to maintain the effectiveness of the QMS. For more details, once you get to actually working on this item, probably just open the ISO norm and check this section 5.3 again. What's important next? You now have to show how this quality policy translates into measurable quality objectives. And one way you can approach this is first think of 3 to 4 bullet points. I can give you some very generic examples that I often see in my consultancy work. Let's say you want to hire qualified employees. You want to always maintain safety and regulatory compliance, especially for your products. You want to achieve high accessibility of your products, so make it available for a lot of users, right? And a classical one is also always customer satisfaction. Next thing here is add a couple more sentences to describe those bullet points in more detail. So I totally did not copy paste this just now, but again, it's just to give you a rough idea. How you can, for example, describe this further is that employee qualification entails not only that you hire highly qualified individuals, but also by providing continuous training or by promoting the exchange of knowledge at the workplace. Safety and regulatory compliance can be as simple as you don't want to have a lot of nonconformities once you ever get audited by authorities or a notified body. Your 13485 requirements here again are simply that those objectives must be measurable and they must be consistent with your quality policy, so that one aspect of your policy translates into one quality objective further below. And your quality objectives can cover both regulatory requirements and requirements for your product. In the last step, moving on, you need to connect those objectives to a set of goals that you regularly work with and a method of tracking goals that you already use at your company. This is what we do here. To be very clear here, this is not a hard requirement, but this is something that we came up with. The more implicit requirement is that you need to regularly review how your company complies with those quality objectives you just defined. And the best way to do that, in our experience, is to simply reuse some methodology that is already established in your company. So most clients that we work with already have goals to achieve this year or this quarter, and a method to track this. What you can simply do is, here in section 2, simply reference to a sort of separate sheet or document that you already have. What this could practically look like is, for example, like this. Let's say you already have some of these business goals here, and then you need to make sure, obviously, that these goals also reflect your quality policy. So this is what we have here: employee qualification, safety and regulatory compliance, and a number of KPIs, which you can then track throughout each quarter of the year. And for example, you could use traffic light methodology for tracking like this. So just a brief recap. In a nutshell, think of all of this as a waterfall kind of approach. You first write a very abstract quality policy. You then specify that further into quality objectives, and you then make this most specific as part of your goal tracking methodology that you already are using regularly and which you always keep up to date in your company. Like this, in past companies that I worked with, this approach always earned me a little bit of brownie points with auditors, but also management often liked it, as in how it converted super abstract regulatory requirements into at least some sort of practical use. I know this exercise now has taken up a bit of time. Trust me, the rest is going to be a lot quicker. Next up, roles. To answer a very typical question that I get a lot here, no, you don't need to write down all the roles that you have in your company or that you will potentially have. Only write down the roles that are relevant to your QMS now. In our template, you will see the minimum roles which you will need to define, starting with management, the quality management officer or QMO, and the so-called person responsible for regulatory compliance or PRC. Now, the minimum by which you need to describe those roles is what kind of tasks and responsibilities does this person have, and what minimum qualification is needed for this role. Basically, you can come up with the kind of stuff that you will find in a job posting on LinkedIn. Obviously, I'm joking here. It's just to get you an idea. This is what you do then for all the roles that you have in your company. And on a last note, as your company grows, you will have to add more roles to this list, obviously. Large companies typically outsource this documentation then to a separate job description sheet, which you can then again simply reference here. Moving on to the last section of our template. Processes. Here you list up all processes that your QMS is going to have. This is the part I said in the beginning you will need to get back to after all your QMS work is done. And two last remarks on this. First, note the process categories. Those are more or less arbitrary in its naming and labeling, but they do have a function. They will help you, for example, to classify certain processes as more risky than others. And that will be relevant once we get into things like internal auditing, where you will need to audit those processes more often than others. And the last remark again on your hopefully very bright and successful future. Once your company grows to hundreds of people and a more complex set of QMS processes, it often makes sense at some point to add or reference here an overview flowchart that shows how these processes are related to each other and interact with one another. For now, I hope you didn't fall asleep yet and you're ready to get started on your first QMS document.